This video is sponsored by my good friends over at Kicks.com.au, who are currently running a number of incredible deals for their Kicksmas sales, including a number of excellently priced 4K Blu-ray bundles featuring a kids animation bundle and a 2020 bestsellers bundle, as well as a terrific 2 for $40 4K deal featuring over 150 titles such as the 2000 and 2018 Grinch movies. Head to Kicks.com.au now. The Grinch is Dr Seuss's Scrooge-like creation, first published in books before making the jump to animation, later appearing in 2 movies up on the silver screen, 2 of the highest grossing holiday movies we have ever seen. In 2020, after almost 65 years of existence, Mr. Grinch's popularity lives on in persistence. To celebrate the 20th anniversary of his first feature movie, I take a look at his long and fascinating history. With The Grinch one of Seuss's most wonderful literary contributions, it's time to slide into this short edition of Cartoon Evolution. Theodore Seuss Geizel, known professionally as Dr Seuss, began as a writer and cartoonist for magazines and advertising in the late 1920s. Throughout the 1930s, he found himself a children's author, writing and illustrating a number of well-received and best-selling books. With the emergence of the Second World War in Europe, Seuss landed a gig as editorial cartoonist for the daily newspaper PM, producing more than 400 propaganda illustrations between 1941 and 1943, much of which took swipes against rising fascism and raised support for the US entrance into the war. Once the US had entered the war, Seuss began taking direct commissions from the war effort, illustrating posters for the Treasury Department and the War Production Board, and under the ranks of commander and army captain, writing propaganda films for the first motion picture unit of the US Army Air Forces, headed by illustrious filmmaker Frank Capra. One of Seuss's first tasks in the motion picture unit was to write a series of cartoons and companion comics featuring the character Private Snafu, designed to train undereducated soldiers in basic army protocols and field safety procedures. Leon Schlesinger, head of the Warner Brothers animation unit, won the bid to produce the series, putting some of his top directors, including Friz Freleng and Bob Clampett, onto the job. However, it was the prolific Chuck Jones who captained the vast majority of the 28 cartoons, striking a friendship with Seuss through their collaboration, even living together for a period of time. At the end of the war, 2 of Seuss's 1945 short films, Your Job in Germany and Our Job in Japan, went on to be the basis for documentaries Hitler Lives and Designed for Death, which both won Academy Awards that he was not the recipient of. Jones would refer to these films as having been pirated, particularly as his screen credit was removed. In 1950, a third Seuss work earned an Academy Award when his 1950 short story, Gerald McBoing Boing, was adapted into a cartoon by UPA. On the back of this success, Seuss was approved a pitch for a live-action film by UPA's distributor, Columbia Pictures. Seuss not only wrote the script for The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, but was heavily involved in its extravagant Seussian production design. Sadly, on release, Dr. T was an enormous failure, both critically and commercially. These experiences soured Seuss on the movie business, turning him, as Jones said, anti-Hollywood. Seuss then returned to children's literature, soon publishing a number of his most beloved texts, including 1954's Horton Hears a Who, which marked the first appearances of the microscopic Whos, and his 1957 breakthrough smash, The Cat in the Hat. While loaded with exciting visuals, vibrant colours, and fun rhythmical verse, the post-war Seuss books were also full of political and social undercurrents, providing educational and humanitarian messages, taking aim at fascism, authoritarianism, and racism, rallying for equality and self-belief, and preaching environmentalism. In late 1957, Seuss began concocting his next book, in which he planned to take on the consumerism, commercialism, and materialism of the Christmas season, focusing on a Scrooge-like character called the Grinch. Seuss had used the word Grinch in his stories twice before. His 1953 book Scrambled Egg Super featured an exotic bird called the Beagle-Baked Bald-Headed Grinch, which bore absolutely no similarity, and more predominantly in his 1955 line poem The Hubbub and the Grinch. The Grinch in this tale was a sneaky swindler, tricking the Hubbub into buying a piece of string after convincing him it's worth more than the sun. While again the Grinch isn't the same, he does bear some similarities in his appearance, though his fur is yellow, and in his cunning, selfish personality, likewise encompassing themes of commercialism and greed. For the classic 1957 version of The Grinch, the character was depicted as a tall, gangly creature with a bulging pear-shaped body and head, long, spindly legs, arms and fingers, large feet, and white fur. The tale told of this solitary character so devoid of love, compassion, or empathy that he plans to rid the Whos of Whoville, returning from Horton, of their greatest love of all: Christmas. Though through his selfish actions and the Who's strange acceptance and forgiveness of him, he learns the true meaning of the holiday. Though Seuss never spoke of any correlation, it's quite clear that the story mirrored Dickens' A Christmas Carol, particularly in the character arcs of their respective lead misers. In a 1957 interview with Redbook, Seuss noted that he was his own inspiration behind the character and the story's message, saying, "I was brushing my teeth on the morning of the 26th of last December when I noticed a very Grinchish countenance in the mirror, so I wrote about my sour friend the Grinch to see if I could rediscover something about Christmas that I'd obviously lost," saying in another interview, "Every grown-up hates Christmas from the commercial aspect." Seuss was an often grouchy eccentric who lived a solitary life with an enormous distaste for large crowds. In his later years, he was also disconnected from his faith, a result of living through the war and the Prohibition. Naturally, he fused a lot of himself into this Grinchy alter ego, even aging him 53, his age at the time. His stepdaughter once remarked, "I always thought the Cat in the Hat was Ted on his good days and the Grinch was Ted on his bad days." He embraced the comparisons, driving a car with a Grinch license plate. Seuss wrote a majority of the story in just a few weeks, describing it as the easiest book of his career to write, though found trouble writing the finale. While comfortable in fusing social and political messages into his stories, he was less so with religious themes, saying, "I got hung up on how to get the Grinch out of the mess. I got into a situation where I sounded like a second-rate preacher or some Bible thumper. Finally, in desperation, without making any statement whatever, I showed the Grinch and the Who's together at the table and made a pun on the Grinch carving roast beast. I had gone through thousands of religious choices and then it came out like that." By mid-May 1957, Seuss had completed How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and it was published mere months later, first in Redbook and then in book form. It too was a hit with readers and critics, who praised it unanimously. Kirkus Reviews described it as irrepressible and irresistible, calling the Grinch easily the best Christmas cad since Scrooge. Selling thousands of copies annually into the middle 60s, it became a reasonably instant holiday classic. And around this time, Seuss's ex-army pal Chuck Jones contacted him with an idea. A wonderful, terrific idea. Jones had left Warner Animation in 1963 after directing more than 200 Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, and was now at MGM directing Tom and Jerry cartoons. Having dabbled in TV production, then the dominant medium for animation, he was ready to try his hand at an animated TV special, which were becoming incredibly popular, particularly around Christmas. Having wanted to work with Seuss again for some time and adapt one of his books, Jones felt The Grinch would be the perfect collaboration, especially as he found a little of himself in the character, saying, "Everybody hates Christmas a little bit. When someone comes along who hates Christmas completely and openly, we love it. I thought, I can embrace this." Still soured on his Hollywood experience, Seuss was hesitant to allow any of his works to make the jump from pages to screen. He did, however, have an enormous respect and trust in Jones, who convinced him to agree, saying TV was another field. After getting the okay from MGM, Jones's team put together a set of storyboards and pitched it to 25 potential sponsors. Eventually, the Foundation for Commercial Banks bought it in a move Jones found very odd, finding them an unlikely unlikely group because of the story's anti-commercial statement, and particularly for its inclusion of the line, "Maybe Christmas doesn't come from a store." Jones said, "I never thought of a bank endorsing that kind of line, but they overlooked it, so we went ahead and made a picture." Cartoon Brew notes that the generous budget afforded to the project by the sponsor resulted in fuller animation and higher production values than most other TV animation of the period, which certainly explains why it more resembles Jones's theatrical cartoons than those made for TV. Seuss wasn't heavily involved in the production, though worked closely with Jones during storyboarding, giving his okay to many of the changes made transitioning the 50-page story, in Jones's estimate 12 minutes worth of screen time, into a 30-minute special. While almost the entirety of Seuss's original text was used as narration and dialogue, Jones extended the story with, in his words, little undercurrent things, most notably expanding Max's role as he found him ripe for narrative potential and gag work as the most important character who represented the audience as an observer. Additionally, Jones added songs, a staple of all holiday specials. Staying true to the non-religious angle, he suggested new carols be written in Seussian Latin, so they sounded spiritual to those unauthored in Latin while being literal nonsense. While melodic duties went to composer Albert Haig, lyrics went to the one man who could write authentic Seussian Latin, Seuss himself, who later said, "Chuck is a fine fellow. He's the only person I know who lets me write lyrics." 3 songs were written for the film, which have each become synonymous not only with The Grinch, but with Christmas as a whole. Given that the special was produced in colour, Jones needed to take liberties with the visual design, as the black and white book only featured red and pink spot colouring. He decided to ink the Grinch a sickly green, inspired by the ugly colour that was commonly found on rental cars. While sticking true to Seuss's artistic style, Jones certainly put his own recognisable spin on the designs. In fact, Jones initially got in an argument with Seuss over his take on the character, with Seuss first remarking, "That don't look like the Grinch, that looks like you." Seuss remained reluctant throughout early production, but eventually came around to Jones's take. His widow, Audrey, later saying, "As it went along and as he saw it, the songs and everything were just wonderful, and then he was a happy camper." Jones imagined no one more perfect to voice the Grinch than Boris Karloff, a star of Golden Age Universal horror films, best known for playing Frankenstein's monster. Because of this, Seuss believed he would be too scary for the role. However, Jones had come across a number of audiobooks he had narrated and found a poetic quality in his readings. Thus, he was cast not only as the Grinch, but the narrator as well. In later years, Jones considered Karloff's voice work the major reason for the special's everlasting success. An uncredited Thurl Ravenscroft, best known for his role as Tony the Tiger in Frosted Flakes commercials and as a vocal performer in many Disney park attractions, lent his voice to the songs. After the immense success of A Charlie Brown Christmas the previous year, CBS paid 4 times more, $315,000, the equivalent of $2.5 million in 2020, to play the Grinch in a 2-year run. A 1966 Variety article noted the Grinch not only stole Christmas, but picked CBS's pocket, acknowledging it as one of the most expensive half hours of television ever made. When the special debuted on December 18, 1966, reaction amongst critics was mixed. Variety called it a literate half hour, and Toronto Star called it perfect, while others found it a disappointment, with Newsday calling it fodder for the tube, and the New York Times remarking the Grinch to be a creation that should be left undisturbed on the printed page. Regardless, 38 million viewers tuned in, more than double the 15.5 million that watched Charlie Brown. The special was thus an enormous hit, and like Charlie Brown, continues in syndication annually. It even helped skyrocket sales of the book in following years. Following the success of the special, Jones and Seuss collaborated on a 1970 adaptation of Horton Hears a Who, and began work on The Cat in the Hat before a shutdown of MGM Animation forced the project into the hands of Jones's Looney Tunes colleagues Friz Freleng and David H. DePatie, who produced a number of other Seuss specials, returning to The Grinch in 1977 for Halloween special Halloween is Grinch Night. Produced as a prequel, this special saw an entirely the evil Grinch unleashing hell on Whoville on Halloween night, with no redeeming arc whatsoever. Produced on a much smaller budget, it featured cheaper animation and highly surrealist visuals. As a result, the Grinch's design was altered. Here he appeared quite a bit pudgier and less wiry, with a much shorter quiff and a darker colour scheme. Airing on October 28, 1977, the special didn't receive anywhere near the audience acclaim of the original, though did win an Emmy Award and lives on as a cult favourite today. In 1982, DePatie and Freeling produced one final Grinch special with Seuss. The Grinch Grinches the Cat in a Hat saw the Grinch travelling to the real world to reconnect with his evil side. Here he runs into the Cat in a Hat, who offends him by calling him Mr. Greenface. Hijinks ensue as both parties spend the 25-minute runtime annoying the heck out of one another until the cat reminds Grinch of the love he once had. Of course, this incredibly paltry special lacked any of the heart, intelligence, or ingenuity of the original, with a story aimed at the youngest of audiences and a minuscule budget that made for even worse animation. Here, the Grinch returned to his Grinch Night design, though his quiff and collar were replaced with small, straggly hairs, likely to save on time and budget. Despite being but a shell of the original, it still managed to take away an Emmy Award. The Grinch didn't appear in any visual media again until 1996's The Wubbulous World of Dr Seuss from Jim Henson Productions. Here he appeared regularly in Muppet form as a series villain, often antagonising the citizens of Seussville. While this was technically a live-action series, the Grinch didn't make his first proper jump into the medium for a couple of years. After Seuss's death in 1991, Audrey sold the Grinch's film rights to Universal Pictures, in what Variety described as among the richest rights deals ever made at the time. How the Grinch Stole Christmas, directed by prolific director Ron Howard and starring beloved comedian Jim Carrey, released in the year 2000. It was the first feature-length film based on one of Seuss's books, working also as a live-action remake of the Jones cartoon, retaining many elements that he introduced, including Max's expanded role, the gag-laden sleigh sequence, the songs, and the Grinch's green fur, now synonymous with the character. In order to further extend the story, more new elements were introduced, including a backstory which aimed to make the Grinch a more sympathetic character with an actual motive, as well as an expanded role for Cindy Lou Who, the only named Who in the book. For 92 days, Carrey endured torturous makeup and costume that covered his entire body, even his eyeballs, which he likened to being buried alive every day. The film's producers even hired a CIA operative trained in torture resistance to help him tolerate the process. Described at the time as the biggest motion picture production in years, it opened to lukewarm reviews, with Roger Ebert calling it just not much fun. However, it was a hit with audiences, particularly children. I know, I was one at the time, and grossed over $345 million worldwide on a $120 million budget, becoming the 6th highest grossing film of the year and the 2nd most successful holiday film of all time, behind only 1990's Home Alone, living on 20 years as a holiday classic. Both films were, however, knocked from their places with the release of Universal and Illumination Entertainment's feature-length CG animated adaptation starring Benedict Cumberbatch in 2018. Here the Grinch again takes on his green tone, though in a much brighter shade, and appears taller, slimmer, cleaner, and less grungy than previously. He was also given buck teeth and white eyes, usually coloured yellow. The film is once again an amalgamation of previous versions, again retaining Jones's well-known elements such as the songs, as well as the live action's stronger focus on Cindy Lou Who. With an aim towards a much younger demographic, the Grinch was made less cynical and given an even more sympathetic backstory. While critics praised its gorgeously vibrant animation, it failed to connect with most audiences, taking in $511.8 million at the worldwide box office and placing 18th highest grossing of the year. In December 2020, The Grinch made one more jump onto the screen when NBC aired How the Grinch Stole Christmas the Musical, a newly staged recording of the 1994 Broadway production featuring Matthew Morrison in the title role. With this currently the character's final foray into visual media, we must finally close out this visual encyclopedia. When he'll return again to our screens is currently unsure. He's already given us so much, it would be greedy to want more. With his books, specials and movies living on in our hearts, it's hard to see a Christmas where from him we'll ever be apart. And at that, it's over to you who's. I want to know which version of Dr. Seuss's The Grinch is your absolute favourite. Fire away down in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Hey everyone, if you haven't yet, smash that big old subscribe button up on your screen to keep up to date with all my content and hit that like button down below. Also, don't forget to check me out on social media and please consider supporting me over on Patreon for as little as $1 a month for exclusive videos, early access content and to get your name up on the screen. Thanks again for watching.